Thank you guys for having me here today. So what I would love to focus on today is really two things. So I'm going to start by just giving you a very, very brief, like 2 slides on the AI for Earth grant program. And then we're going to spend the most of the time talking about some of the amazing machine learning research that's happening as a result of AI for Earth. Some of this stuff is stuff that myself and my team have worked on, and some of it is things that Microsoft Research has worked on, and some of it are things that are people outside of Microsoft are working on, and we're just providing funding. So I'm going to try to be really clear on who is doing what, but if you have any questions, feel free to ask. All right, so really quick, AI for Earth, what is that? So there is a grant program that Microsoft has started. It was announced in Paris at a big conference by the Microsoft president, Brad Smith, in December of 2017. And at that time, he announced that Microsoft was publicly allocating $50 million over a 5-year period to anyone doing data science or machine learning work in the areas of agriculture, water, climate, or biodiversity. So that was one of the reasons I was so excited to come here to St. Louis when I heard about this conference, because I know what a hub and such amazing work that's happening in agriculture and that kind of space. So this is my quick pitch that, go look at our website. Make sure if you're a startup, if you're an academic, if you work at a university, if you are a large corporation, this is open to anyone. And the very worst thing is when there's a large pot of money that goes unspent. So I want to make sure all of the people here doing AI today, please go ahead and take advantage of that. Submit a grant. You can get anything from data labeling funding to data science help. And please reach out to me specifically. One of the things I would love to leave here today with is if there are projects where we could lend you some data scientists and that would help accelerate things, I would love to hear about that. So data science help, data labeling help, where we can give you funding to help label data, and then Azure Cloud Computing credit. So please find me on Twitter or LinkedIn or any of those things afterwards if you don't get a chance to talk to me. But I would love to talk more about the program. OK, so that's what I'm going to say about that. Now, I want to cover 5 different examples of projects that I think were really, really amazing that were done as a result of the AI for Earth grant program. And I'm going to start with Project Premonition. So Project Premonition is something that was done out of Microsoft Research. It originated there, funded by AI for Earth. And the principal researcher is a guy by the name of Ethan Jackson. And the idea behind Project Premonition is, can we get out in front of an outbreak of disease and be able to predict that it would happen before the outbreak actually happens? Okay? So think about, this is dating myself a little bit. I remember when the mad cow outbreak happened because I was in college then. And since then, we've had West Nile, we've had Zika, we've had avian flu, we've had all of these various disease outbreaks. So how could we use machine learning to potentially find and react to those before they become widespread outbreaks? And so this was the idea. What if we leverage little data collectors that are out there collecting random blood samples in the environment already? And I'm, of course, talking about mosquitoes, right? So mosquitoes are out there. They are biting humans. They are biting animals. And so if we can collect those mosquitoes, blooded mosquitoes that have consumed blood meals, we can actually take the blood that they fed on, reverse engineer it using our Metagenomics Pipeline, and be able to tell what animal it came from and what diseases that animal was carrying. So we'll talk about that next. The only other thing I wanted to mention, too, is that little fun fact at the beginning of this particular slide. 75% of these infectious diseases actually do originate with animals and then spread to humans. So you've heard of like avian flu and mad cow, but there's a lot of other ones that are less cutesy named directly after the animal, but still very, very relevant. So being able to monitor those populations is enormously helpful. All right, so here's how we do it. There's 2 key contributions to this research, and the first is a little trap. So it's about yay big. It's a cylinder, and it's got 64 individual little cells in it. And we've put a little lure in the center. So there's a little cylinder where you can put a lure, and that lure can contain multiple things. We've experimented with various scents. We've experimented with light. Insects are attracted to light. And we've also done CO2. We as humans exhale carbon dioxide, and animals are attracted to that as well. So we've experimented with several things, and then the bugs gather. And then if it's just a regular or some kind of non-mosquito, it just kind of goes, checks out the lure, and flies away. If it is a mosquito, the little trapdoor will flip shut and capture the mosquito, and then we can take it to a lab for the work. And you can see this has been done this is actually out of date, but many more experiments than that. I think that was primarily the Houston work with the Zika virus, which was around the time of the Zika outbreak. We did some testing in Houston there. All right, so two key aspects of this research. The first is that intelligent trap. So there's kind of I'll show you a better picture of it in a second, but that's a look at it kind of in the dark where we have these 64 individual cells. Bugs can fly in, bugs can fly out. And by terrestrial arthropods, that is essentially insects. And so insects are a lot of things. They're disease vectors, but they're also pollinators, bioindicators, pests. And then we're really taking advantage of the fact that some of them are blood feeding and could be leveraged for this particular research. The other thing that's kind of interesting here, and I can jump to the next slide too, the second key contribution of this research, besides that intelligent trap, is the metagenomics pipeline. So once you have those insects, you need to get down to the metagenomics level if you want to be able to tell what diseases it's carrying. And so we've done some work in conjunction with University of California, Berkeley, to be able to reverse engineer essentially what makes up that blood and be able to do some interesting things with it. So it can scan for known and novel disease vectors, viruses, and then learn more about microbiomes and such as well. And then one interesting thing here, so all terrestrial vertebrates, when we talk about the scale of this, what was really interesting to me is just how much we don't know about this space. Like, it's so much we don't know still. So when you look at the number of terrestrial vertebrates we have, that's essentially land animals with a backbone. There's only 10 to the fourth such species. But when we get to terrestrial arthropods, there's many more. But then bacteria and viruses, when you start to look at that world, there's an estimated 10 to the 7th to 10 to the 9th species of bacteria and viruses. Anyone know how many we actually have names for? Just viruses. I'm gonna narrow it down to just viruses, not bacteria and viruses. Anyone know how many? We actually have names for 4,500 viruses. Like, that's it. So there's a lot we don't know. So I may say some stuff about finding novel viruses and such, and that sounds really impressive, but it's actually not that impressive because there's just it's such a big space, and there's only names for so many that exist right now. Okay. So let's talk about those two key contributions separately. We'll start with the intelligent trap, so our robotic field biologist. I have a little video here playing on a loop. Watch the very center cell right here. A little mosquito will come and fly and kind of check it out, and if you watch very closely, the little trapdoor will shut in just a second. So there he is, and boom, you could see it just kind of closed on him. It's important that the trap doesn't actually kill them. It just confines them in a space. And you can see from the picture on the left how nice that is. If you were an entomologist, if you studied bugs, you would actually be really, really excited to see the quality of that sample, because a lot of traditional bug things use some kind of suction or fans, and so a lot of the bug collections can get chopped up or not in as great condition when they're found, but these actually remain in very, very nice condition because we're just essentially trapping them in there, but it's not even killing them. And that's an example, that picture is an Aedes aegypti, which is the species of mosquito that actually is responsible for carrying the Zika virus. And so that one was captured using one of these smart traps in Houston, Texas during the Zika outbreak. We've also used it in other areas on the globe. There's really two key things I want you to take away from this slide. One is a sense of how big it is. So seeing the actual robotic trap in conjunction with people, you can get a sense for how big it is. There it's mounted on a tripod, but we've also hung them or put them on the ground or whatever. But in that particular case, it's mounted on a tripod, but it's, again, only about this big relative to people. The other thing is the importance of being able to do AI on the edge. I think that's a really key thing. Meaning, you can train algorithms. In fact, in this work, the machine learning model is trained on Azure, trained using the cloud, But when you're actually executing the model, you want to be able to do that locally. So that machine learning model is created in Azure and then exported and run locally right on that device. And that's really important for a couple key reasons. So number one, the internet access in this particular village in Tanzania is very spotty. This is a very remote village. It's only accessible via boat. And you can see they do have cell phone. Of course, the woman is talking on cell phone right there. But the internet isn't super fabulous there. So if it had to be dependent on an internet connection to make a call to the cloud and come back, that may not always work. And then secondly, it's also very slow. Like that bug may kind of go in, check things out, and you got to make a decision kind of quick whether you want to keep it or not. And so being able to run these models on the edge, so not needing cloud connection is wonderful. So this, our particular trap right there makes a decision within 7 milliseconds, whether it's going to close the door or not. So there's an individual classifier. And the way it works is there's actually a little LED that flies. So when they fly through the individual trap door, each thing, it leaves an impression of shadows. It's kind of like a light sensor. And so as the wing beat goes through, the wing beat is really the key indicator that we use to be able to differentiate. And we've created machine learning classifiers down to the level of like the individual species. Like we can actually differentiate with about 90% accuracy between an Aedes aegypti mosquito, which is the one that carries Zika, versus a Culex genus mosquito, which is the one that carries West Nile. So it's really, really interesting, like how, and I'll show you some samples of that in just a second. All right, so here are a couple different examples of various bugs we've interacted with and learned about. The first is a tsetse fly. The tsetse fly carries African sleeping sickness, so it's a very a disease vector. The second one is a scarab beetle, and the scarab beetle is a bioindicator and an agricultural pest. And then the third one is a very rare species of mosquito that we actually found in the same village where Jane Goodall did the work with the chimpanzees. You remember that in Gombe? That was found living near the chimpanzees in Gombe, that particular breed of mosquito. And so let me kind of break down some of the data that you're seeing here. So the individual little, the first chart that you see right there, that is the data that's coming in the time domain from that light sensor. So you can see their wing beat patterns look very distinctive. You can tell, I mean, just by looking at these visually, you can see that the wing beat pattern of a tsetse fly looks very different than a scarab beetle and that particular type of mosquito. And then the chart underneath it, the second one, is actually the same data, but in the frequency domain. It's just an FFT of the time domain data. So it's the same data in frequency domain. And then the thing right here is just which cell they were in. So there's 64 individual cells, so it doesn't really matter for these purposes, but you can tell exactly which trap it was captured in. And so these were set to capture these various species, but you can either just record that a probe happened, that an insect probed and was there, and then let it go, or you can choose to capture it in the case of some of the insects we wanted to study further. And then finally, it collects a lot of other data as well. So even when there's just a probe, this is an intelligent device, so it can capture things like, okay, at the time of the probe, what was the time, where is my location right now, get the exact latitude and longitude, barometric pressure, temperature data, humidity data, like all kinds of stuff about the environment. And then we can use that to make some intelligent decisions about mosquitoes and when they're most active, and ambient light, and all kinds of other stuff about the environments and when they're most active and such. All right. And then that data was all collected. Actually, that data that you saw on the previous screen and this data as well is a result of the Houston trials. And you can see here like a lot of very interesting things. So one of the things, so what this data is, the orange color that you see is the Culex genus of mosquito, which is the West Nile one. And then the Aedes aegypti mosquito, which is the Zika one, is the turquoise line right here. So you can see that there's kind of some interesting things. Like, for example, if you look at this chart right here, you can tell that that actually measures barometric pressure and like how sensitive they are to barometric pressure. So essentially think of these charts as like the weights on the machine learning algorithm of how important those various characteristics are. So this particular one right here is the barometric pressure. And you can see Culex does not care about it at all. He's fairly consistent, but it totally affects the Aedes aegypti. So that's very interesting to us. So we can kind of use that information. And we did work very closely with the Houston Public Health Department to say, okay, this may be the optimal time to spray for mosquitoes, for example, when we know they're out and most active and that sort of thing. So very, very interesting stuff there as well. Okay, so that is the kind of the level of the robotic trap. Now let's transition to the second key contribution of this research, which is the metagenomics pipeline. So once we have that particular mosquito, we've trapped a mosquito, and you can see the next step is we actually collect the traps, we take them to a lab, and then we turn the mosquitoes essentially into mosquito juice, which is very concentrated DNA that comprises the mosquito and the blood it was carrying and such. And then essentially what we are doing at that point is taking those DNA samples and indexing them across the whole. There's big, large genomics databases out there. So essentially there's a big database of the entire tree of life, all partially sequenced life forms that's out there. So we're comparing the DNA that we have with the data that exists, that is already out there. And we want to do it as fast as possible. And so basically so kind of the inputs here are what you would get out of a genomics analyzer. And then we're feeding that into this SNAP algorithm. And what it computes is essentially the makeup of that particular sample. So we find that a sample may be roughly 90% mosquito, in this case the Aedes aegypti mosquito, maybe 5% Homo sapiens if it had bit a mosquito, or if it had bit a human right before we captured it. And then you can see a very small portion of that is actually a novel rhabdovirus, which is essentially the same virus family as rabies is from. And we can see that it has an identity. It's a novel one. Again, don't be scared by the fact that it's a novel virus. Remember, there's only 4,500 named viruses, so there's a lot of ones that just don't have names. And so you can see it's very similar to that. So some kind of species or strain of a rabies-like virus was found. And so we're doing that as fast as possible. So how can we do this? So we're using an algorithm called SNAP. Now, SNAP was developed in conjunction, it was joint work between Microsoft Research and UC Berkeley. And that data is actually out of date. So 3 hours running on 200 Azure compute nodes. We can actually do it even faster now. And of course, the more you scale it out, the more nodes you're running it on in parallel, the faster it runs as well. So, but really this is enabled via cloud computing. Like, we would not be able to do this without a cloud, just because the amount of data, when you're thinking about the whole tree of life and being able to index across all partially sequenced life forms, like that kind of thing would not be possible without the power of the cloud. So very, very cool there. And then when you look at the machine learning aspects of it, we're using Bayesian mixture models here. And how those are used, when you think about it, there's a lot of things in the tree of life that have a very similar makeup. So humans have a lot in common with chimpanzees, for example. Rats and mice have a lot in common, so there's a lot of similar DNA across there. And so essentially what this Bayesian mixture model does is probabilistically find what's most likely, and then they can amplify the result of the more likely fits there, and then dampen the effects of this. So if you see this example here, where that could have been a rat or a mouse, it can kind of dampen the effect of mouse and push up rat, for example. And then we have some great visualization tools. If anyone here does genomics work, you may be familiar with the Corona visualizer. I was not prior to working on this project, but the Corona visualizer is very popular use for visualizing the output of genomics. So we do integrate with that nicely. Okay, so what about results? So if we synthetically generate a sample, so what I mean by that is I randomly sample from mosquito DNA, I randomly sample from some host animal DNA, and I randomly sample from viruses, and then I put all that, I feed that into our machine learning model, get a result back, is 99.99% accurate at recomposing that. If I stick some novel viruses in there, so I randomly sample, like, okay, these viruses don't exist, but let me just play and grab some stuff that would be there, we're about 97% accurate at putting it in the right approximate family. And then the next step after that, of course, is lab-based, where we actually feed mosquitoes blood from particular animals and such, and have knowledge of what diseases they carry, and then reverse engineer that and see how we do. And you can see the accuracy there is still fairly good as well. All right, if you want any more information on that, that's Ethan Jackson, the principal researcher on the project. And you can get more information at microsoft.com/premonition. That is our first story. Number 2, a project called FarmBeats. So has anyone heard of FarmBeats here in the audience? Okay, cool. So FarmBeats is actually some work that was done, again, by Microsoft Research. The principal researcher on this one was a gentleman by the name of Ranveer Chandra. And I know he's been to St. Louis several times because there's so much great agricultural work being done here. But the idea behind FarmBeats is the fact that the world's population is growing very, very quickly, right? And it was projected at a meeting of the United Nations in 2009, it was projected that by the year 2050, we are just not going to have enough food to feed everyone if we continue with our current rates of food production. So how can we, grow more food with less and do it in a sustainable way? We're not wearing out the earth, and really enable data-driven farming and machine learning to see if we can guide some of that. And so Ranveer really focused on that in his work. And so they started with the idea of precision agriculture. Now, a lot of people in this room are probably familiar with precision agriculture. I was not when I started on the project. But the idea behind precision agriculture, for those who aren't familiar, is the idea of, instead of homogeneously watering a field, for example, so that every part of the field gets the exact same amount of water, really measure and then only water what really needs water. That would be precision irrigation. And there's lots of other examples of this, precision fertilization. My favorite is precision pesticides, right? That is a great example of usage because, pesticides are, they're great because they help us grow food without pests, so there's benefit to them. But the downsides are obviously they're not great for the environment, they're not great for us who are eating the food, and they're also very expensive for the farmer, right? So if there's a way that we can, use them intelligently so that they're, we're keeping the pests away from the food, but we're also doing, some smart work to minimize the amount of pesticides that we need to use, like everybody there wins. So what we can do, we've actually done some work around that precision pesticides as well. So let's look at precision agriculture here. I kind of already explained what it was, so I'm going to skip that. And so we were talking about how to do this, or when I was first coming on board with this project, I sat down and was chatting with Ranveer about it, and all of that made sense. And I've done IoT work before, Internet of Things, right? So I've actually used sensors before that measure things like light and temperature and water, moisture levels. So I'm like, okay, we could just, I get what you do. You could put some sensors in the ground, and that totally makes sense. And then Ranveer told me that one of the big challenges here was that it was costing about $1,000 per sensor. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, I can get you that sensor for $10 on Amazon right now. Hold on, I can fix this. And of course, he was well aware of this fact. And it turns out that the problem, or where this cost was coming from, was not from the actual sensor itself. Okay, so my next thought was maybe, all right, could it be power, right? We need to charge these things, and in the middle of a field, you're obviously not going to have power outlets, so maybe it was the cost of power. But no, that was not it either. We actually power these things using just solar panels, and solar panels run roughly $50 to $100 US. So again, not on the scale of thousands. We're only talking, about 100 max. Oh, and just for context too, this is our what our thing looks like. We actually have all the sensors and such that measure temperature, light, all these things are on a little circuit board there, which is enclosed in waterproof casing, as you see, and there are several leads sticking out that you can use to put in various depths. I think we have one at 4 inches and one at 12 inches into the ground to see the moisture levels, various things. And then we also have, and so that's mounted right there on the pole, and it's being powered by light from the solar panel right there. And we also have a camera mounted there so that the farmer has a real-time insights into the farm and getting both RGB data, so that's natural color, red, green, blue, and then infrared as well. So even at night, you can kind of see what's going on. All right, so it's not the cost of the sensor. It's not the cost of power. What is the cost coming from? And it turns out, you guys may have already guessed the answer, it was connectivity, right? It's getting the data out of the ground, off of these little sensors and into the cloud where we can actually aggregate it and do something useful with it. That's where the cost was coming from. Because when you think about kind of the existing set of technologies, cell phones are awesome, but has anyone driven through a really rural area and your cell phone goes out because the carriers are less incented, there's less people there, there's less business case to have great cell phone coverage. So there's not always great cell phone coverage in big farm areas, as well as in some of the third world countries that we're working in to do this. So that's one thing. And then there's Wi-Fi, and Wi-Fi is also an awesome technology. But the problem with Wi-Fi is that it basically extends like as big as my house, and then it's just done, right? Because I know even just to walk across the street, like my kid's bus stop is literally across the street from my house. So I go walk across the street to get them from the bus stop, and I'm already out of my Wi-Fi range. My phone is out of Wi-Fi range just by crossing the street. So it just doesn't stretch very far, right? So that's kind of the key issue. So remember that. And so there's two things we can do. So number one, we can reduce the number of sensors that we do have, so that way that cost is used less. And then we have some more solutions that I'll talk about in a second. But number one, can we use fewer sensors to help offset this cost? And we can. So it turns out one of the things that we're doing here is we can take fewer sensors, put them in the ground, and then couple that with overhead imagery. So we have drones flying overhead, and those drones are collecting just regular RGB pictures, natural color. And then we can take that, and using both the overhead imagery that we get from the drones, as well as the data from the sensors we do have, we can put those together and use machine learning to be able to extrapolate the value for the rest of the field. And I'll talk more about that in the next slide. The other thing I want to mention, drones are great, but they do have a couple challenges. Battery life is a really big one. Even the best drone has maybe 45 minutes to an hour worth of battery life. And when you're thinking about these huge farms to cover, you have to swap in and out batteries a lot. So, and then regulations is the other really big one. There are some countries where it is just very hard to fly a drone. And so another solution that we've used that's lower tech but still works just fine is a really large helium balloon. And so you can actually anchor those to the ground using a tether, and then put a camera on those, and then just use that. So we've actually used that successfully in several areas where drones are prohibited. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the machine learning. So essentially, this one was using Gaussian processes, but we're essentially combining data from the overhead imagery along with the sensor data that we do have, and then putting that together. And there's really conceptually, there's two key things to understand. And that's we're kind of leveraging spatial smoothness as well as visual smoothness. So spatial, just think of the things that are nearby likely have similar values, right? If we have a value right here and there's something very close to it, it's likely going to be somewhat similar. And then the other things is visual smoothness. So basically things that look the same may have similar values. So if you think of a darker patch over here because it's been freshly watered and another darker patch over there, that may indicate that it was freshly watered too, and so those values may have similar values. So it essentially uses those two things at a conceptual level. All right, so then you can put that all together, and then you get all kinds of great things. And the nice thing as well is you saw that there were cameras. So there's real-time data coming in from the farm. There's a lot of other applications. I talked about precision irrigation and pests. We've also done some work with yield estimation, which was very cool. There's a lot of great research happening in Microsoft's office in India around that. There's pest infection and precision pesticides, fertilizers, all kinds of really, really amazing work being done in this space when you put all that together. The last thing I wanted to mention is that second idea behind, how can we solve the problem of it being so expensive of the sensors for the connectivity challenge. So we solved it one way by reducing the number of sensors. But the other thing is if cellular and Wi-Fi aren't doing the job, what else could we use? And so this was something that was pioneered by Ranveer. His PhD was actually in networking. And so he hit upon the idea of using something called television white spaces. So here's the idea. Typical Wi-Fi that we use right now, this conference internet, is around the 5 gigahertz range, okay? And if you look at things like television channels, so when you think about a television station broadcasting out a signal, that goes to a much, much, much bigger group. And so that's because it's a much lower frequency wave. And so remember, lower frequency ones are bigger, they stretch further, or they're more like this. I'm acting this out in an interpretive dance. But that's essentially what the challenge is. So the idea is, what if we use unused television channels and broadcast data packets out over that? So basically, you're taking an unused television channel and turning it into your own internet. And that internet is something that you can connect to from 10 miles away. So imagine if your home is 10 miles away, you could connect to your home internet from here. And so we call those television white space routers. And you do have to work with the local government. You can't just start sending data packets over unused television channels, or people will get upset. But you can use, we've done this successfully in the Seattle area, in Kenya, in New York, in a couple different places, and it has proven very, very successful. And one television white space router can connect an entire farm with acres and acres of land. All right, so we've done pilots of these all over the world. You can see there's been work in India. Ranveer did one that was not far from where he grew up. In Africa, all over the US, various places in Asia. So some of these are using drones, some of them are using balloons, but it's definitely some work that we're strong pilots and moving forward. All right, and that's kind of the summary, but we're going to keep going. All right, that was number 2. Number 3, so this is research that is being done by USC, the University of Southern California, and funded by AI for Earth. Milind Tambe is the head of kind of their AI for social good work there, and then Elizabeth Bondi is she wrote one of the key papers that I'm going to reference here at the end. And she writes very good papers, by the way. If you're a little bit leery of reading academic papers, or it scares you a little, hers are amazing. They're quick and right to the point, and I love them. So she's a very good researcher. All right, the problem that we're trying to solve here is poaching. So this is an article that was on NPR, and 90 elephants were found dead near the Botswana sanctuary, killed by poachers. And if you take a look, you can see that this was actually 6 months ago, right? Not that long ago. So this is not a problem that's happening a long time ago, or something that's, it is maybe far away, but it is a very, very real, very, very current problem. And here's why this is a really hard problem. So we have all these sanctuaries, all these protected areas, right? But the problem is, like all these things, there's a limited number of staff. So how do you send staff to the right places so that they're being able to protect all the animals, when you consider that a lot of the animals that need protections, so rhinos for their horns, elephants, they're these huge, huge animals that need a lot of space. And so when you look at this is one example of where we have elephants, and just using a very simple map thing, you can see that's over 350 miles wide. So how do you intelligently use those resources that you do have and send them to the right places to make sure that they're able to protect the elephants? Because once they're gone, it's game over, and you can't get the elephant back, or rhino. The other thing is the economics. So why is this happening? When you take a look at some of the data here, the average per capita income in that particular area is $762. If you look at kind of this chart right here on poaching, ivory, so from elephant tusks, is about $1,000 a pound. Gold is 22 grand a pound, and a rhino horn is actually worth 30 grand a pound. So it's literally worth more than gold. And so you take down one elephant, and that's a lifetime income, right? So I can, I don't condone it, but I can understand how, if I had to feed my family, that this may seem like a viable option or something that people do. So it's a problem that's not going away. So how do we fix this? How do we stop this? And let me tell you about the state of the art right now, because it's really, really tricky. So state of the art right now is that they do have drones flying overhead across these large conservation areas. And these drones are capturing real-time data, real-time imagery, and sending them back to people. And then people are watching the screens, and they have to be able to identify animals and humans in those screens from the imagery that's coming back from the drones. And they have to do it in real time because, once an elephant gets taken out, we can't revive it. So How do we do that? And so another thing that makes it very tricky is that these are infrared infrared cameras, because most poaching actually happens at night. It's easier to sneak in and do this stuff at night. So they are infrared. What's tricky about that is infrared imagery, if you've ever seen it, is like blotchy black and white splats, all right? It's harder to glean information from it. It's a very hard task because, again, we're doing this, humans are sitting there doing this processing overnight, so you're gonna get tired, so our performance degrades with fatigue. And then it also requires scale, right? If you wanna put more drones in the air, if poaching is increased in a certain area and you want more drones, you need more humans to monitor it. So, this is an excellent use case for computer vision. So how could we use computer vision to solve this? And so that's exactly what SPOT is. It's an application that's using a faster RCNN algorithm to be able to automatically detect, so object detection problem. We're finding the poachers and the animals in an image in near real time. All right, using the data that's coming back from the drones. Now, this is a very hard problem, and let's talk about why. So looking at these images, so that first grid that you see, the A column, and on the left-hand side is what the operator actually sees. We've made it easy. We've given you the answer on the right-hand side by showing you that little grayed box is where there is actually a poacher, all right? But you can see that's what you actually see. That's the original image. And then we can apply some technology here. So we thresholded certain values, and so with that you get the B. So some things pop a little more. But you can see there's a lot of false positives. And then we also have to do some stabilization of the frames. And this is another thing that makes it even harder, is that, okay, one of the things that makes it easier to spot things on the ground is when you see movement, right? If there's an animal moving or a person moving, that differentiates them from the environment, so that makes it easier, right? But it's harder when there is a drone that's moving overhead and people moving below. You have to do a little bit of image stabilization to be able to reconcile that difference. The other thing that makes it tricky is that people, these drones fly at various heights, and so the human may actually be like 20 pixels big in that image, which is very tricky. The stabilization problem I already mentioned, and then the fact that it's an infrared camera, so you're getting these black and white blotchy images, and we have to do this in real time because you have to catch the poacher before they take action, and internet is spotty in these types of areas, right? So the data is coming back from the thing. You need to be able to interpret them, do that, and do things. So putting all of that together, this is really hard. This is a very, very hard problem, and for all of those reasons. So how do we solve it? Here's a quick look at the architecture that they were using at USC. And because my eyes are not that good, let me look at it here. So we've actually done all of the labeling of data, training, all of that is done beforehand in the cloud. And then in real time, when they're actually sending one of these drones out, what they do is they have a machine on site, like a laptop on site. So it's like a ruggedized, like one laptop with GPU. And so they will send the data first there. And if the internet connection is good, they actually call Azure. If not, they will actually just do the processing on the local machine, because they do have one machine with GPU. So if there's like a bad internet day, they'll do processing locally as well. And then there's two different Azure setups they've used. There's like a basic Azure, they call them Azure Basic and Azure Advanced. Essentially, it's very, very much, very, very similar. The key difference behind them is that Azure Basic just has one GPU virtual machine backing it, and Azure Advanced has a whole Azure Kubernetes cluster backing it. So you can scale out a little bit more. All right, so here's an example of kind of real-time responses coming back. So when you see a little purple around these guys, that means that the algorithm has recognized it. And these are actually not real poachers. This was a field test that was done using the overhead imagery there, but they were testing their model, and you can see that they're able to recognize using in this particular data. You see some of the people turning purple and such. And then the drone is actually trained, or they follow them in real time. So when they do spot humans that are not supposed to be there, because they will spot humans that are valid park rangers as well, they will follow the humans with the drones. Okay, our next one is iNaturalist. So iNaturalist is a very, very cool app. They are a nonprofit, so iNaturalist is its own entity. It is not a Microsoft thing. And This has totally changed the way me and my family do nature walks. It's a really, really fun app where you can download it from iOS or Android. And essentially what it does is you're out taking a nature walk and your child asks you, hey mama, what's that flower? And you have no idea because you're not a botanist or a bird, because there's are there any bird people in the audience? I know bird people know their birds. There are some people who are really good at birds. I'm not a bird person. I do not know my birds. But they'll ask me, what is that? And I don't know. But now I do. So I pull out my iNaturalist app. I go, let's take a picture. And then what it does is, so iNaturalist itself, as a nonprofit, the reason they exist is to gather and augment observations of the natural world, both animals and plants and fungi actually as well, and then make it available for researchers. So they have a database of, this plant has been seen here and this animal was seen here at this time, all of that data. And so all of those observations are crowdsourced. So anyone using the iNaturalist app can upload these observations, and then all of those are put together and then used for science. So they make that public data set available for researchers, conservational biologists, whoever. So that's their goal. But what makes it, I should probably be showing this. So here's all that stuff. So that's great. But the problem is they want labeled data, right? So you might have a little, a beautiful plant that you find and you have an observation, but it's more useful if you know what kind of plant that is. And so their problem was that there was a huge bottleneck because they needed trained experts to actually go through and manually label everything. And even when novice people could hand label them, you need to trust those things. So someone had to go through and do that work. So what we did was implement a computer vision algorithm again to help with that. And so it's a thriving community. You can go check it out online. You can become a user. I think it's a really fun app. And so here's kind of what their pipeline looked like. All these novice users would submit things, and then the expert users had to approve them. So what they did instead is now they're using a computer vision algorithm, so that way you can, in the app, you can click Show Suggestions. It will invoke that and tell you, OK, this is probably this animal. And then those labels are a little bit better quality. OK, so that's essentially what we did. This was done using the Microsoft CNTK, one of the deep learning frameworks, the cognitive toolkit, with around 90% detection accuracy here. And then it was used by both the Snow Leopard Trust to be able to find snow leopards in camera trap images, as well as conservation metrics to find kittiwakes. OK. So that's how this works. We use the model. All right, so let me show you an example, because I think it's much more clear. So I went for a walk when I was visiting Stockholm last year in Sweden. I was walking along by the water, and I saw that bird. And I did not know what that bird was. I figured it was either a heron or a crane. It had a long neck. I was guessing somewhere one of those types of things, but I really had no idea. So I took a picture of it, and I submitted it to iNaturalist. So here's kind of what the app looks like. You can add multiple images of the same animal. So if you get different angles, different zoom levels, whatever, you can do that. But I just have the one image right there. And then if you take it from right within the app, it will automatically use metadata from the picture to fill in the location and the time. In this case, I had taken it with my regular camera and imported it. So I needed to set the location manually. But it's very easy to do. You can just say get current location, and it will do that. And so I have kind of the where and when. And so then I clicked on that View Suggestions, because I did not know what kind of bird it was. And so that's where it invokes that machine learning classifier. And it actually does it at 2 different levels. It'll do both the genus and the species level. If it doesn't have a very, very high confidence in species, it will at least say we know it's in this genus, but here's kind of our top species things. And so in this case, they knew it was a heron. It fell in the heron family somewhere. But it could be a gray heron, gray blue heron, whatever. And so now it just becomes like a matching game that essentially a 13-year-old could do. I looked at this. It did not look anything like this guy or this guy. This one was like completely white. This one had some markings that this one didn't have. But it was actually very similar to the top 2. And one of the other pieces of data that they'll use, if possible, is location as well. And you can see that the gray heron was visually similar as well as seen nearby. So they will actually use that location information to be able to tell that, OK, we've seen that here as well. And then if you actually click into each one of those, you'll get a lot more details, a bunch of sample images of the animal or plant. And then in this case, it turns out that the gray heron is primarily in Europe and Africa, and the great blue heron is primarily in the Americas. So it was, and I was in Europe at the time, so it was in fact a gray heron. So you can select it at either the detail screen or that list view, and then boom, now I have a complete thing which I can submit to iNaturalist. So really, really cool thing. So highly recommend download the app and use it, because it's for nothing else, it's fun, and you're also kind of giving back to science, which I love. And then we actually used the data set. We actually trained it using a PyTorch model, utilizing the top 5,000 most common species on there. And we created a classification model. So let me show that to you real quick. I have a quick demo. So this is the one that Microsoft trained. So my team actually did the work on this, where we trained a model to be able to classify various things. And so if this is something that would be useful in your research at all, we have kind of we can make it available. It's essentially kind of private preview right now. But if you email me or LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever, I can generate you a key so that you can utilize this if you'd like. But here's a couple examples. Let's try this guy. This is either maybe a wolf or a coyote or some kind of big dog. So we check that, and you can see, oh, we are very confident, almost 99% confident that this is a coyote. So good to know. Spiders can be really tricky because there are just so many of them. And this one, it looks like, is the nursery web spider with about 75% accuracy. And then there's some snakes as well. All right, so this one is a timber rattlesnake with fairly high accuracy. It always returns the top 5, most likely. Let's try this one. This one looks like a baby, so it might be a little harder. Either that or it's one of the really small cats. Yeah, so less confident on this one, perhaps an oculate or maybe a bobcat. So the confidence level isn't quite as strong. So anyway, that's an example of our classifier that we also trained on the iNaturalist data set. So if anyone is interested in that, let me know. All right, and then the last one I want to talk to you about, I promised 5 stories. Here's the last one, and that is a company called WildMe. So WildMe is the name of the company. They are also funded with an AI for Earth grant, and then their product is actually called WildBook. They think of themselves as the Facebook of animals, and I'll tell you why in a second. So what WildMe does is actually pretty cool. So they're trying to solve the problem, this problem right here. So this is an article from National Geographic where this very rare whale, a rare killer whale, was found in the Pacific Northwest, and so people wanted to track it, and so they underwent a thing to tag it, to put a tag on the animal, and then in the process of tagging the animal, they ended up accidentally killing it, which was the opposite of the effect they wanted to have. And so there was a huge outcry from the scientific community that this shouldn't have happened, that sort of thing. And so their thought is, we as humans have some distinctive characteristics that make us all unique. So one thing is fingerprints, right? We all have our own distinct fingerprints. Now that's actually true for a lot of other large mammals as well. You may have heard that the zebra stripe patterns, each zebra is unique in how its stripe patterns are put. Same thing with the spots on a giraffe's neck in the torso area. Same thing with the back of a turtle's shell, with the spot patterns on the large cats, with the fluke of a whale shark. So basically, they're taking these large animals that have distinctive characteristics and then building a classification model to recognize animals down to the individual level. So not just, zebra, not a zebra, hot dog, not a hot dog. This is zebra 5703, okay? So really, really cool work. So in this case, we see a new whale, for example. We compare it against a database of lots of thousands of whales, and we can find that it is that particular whale, Willie the whale, as opposed to a different whale. All right. So that in itself is really cool, right? Like that is a very, very cool machine learning problem, just being able to recognize individual animals. But here's where the story goes from good to great. I love this. So they are actually leveraging social media to augment their data. So let's say me, some random person, goes on a whale watching trip, and I take some videos and then I post them on YouTube. So every night at 10 p.m., they have an intelligent agent that wakes up. It goes out, it searches social media, YouTube and other such sites, and then looks for examples using natural language processing. It looks for examples of things like whale sharks. And then it can pull in that data, extract frames from those YouTube things, run object detection on the frames, and then find new animals. All right, so they're finding these animals, and then with that data, they can actually track individual migration patterns of these animals. Of course, there's some bias for the whales that would like to get close to cruise ships and get pictures and videos done, but that kind of thing is still really cool. So individual migration patterns of animals, as well as who they're seen with. So if this animal is frequently seen with that whale, there's actually the social graph is captured as well. And that's why they call themselves the Facebook thing. So let me actually show you. I have a couple slides, whatever, blah, blah. But let me show you this visually, because I think it's a little bit more interesting there. So this is not their actual stuff. This is actually all batch jobs. But here's a visual representation of what they actually do with that intelligent agent. So first of all, somebody posted a picture on YouTube. You can see the picture is actually in Spanish. So video. So we have a lovely codec issue right here. Hold on. Wake back up. There we go. So here's an example of a beautiful whale shark swimming that someone posted on YouTube. So you can get a sense for that this is actually a really gorgeous video. So now we go through and we start processing it. So first thing they do is detect language and write. So look at it really close. Boom. We just changed from Spanish to English. So it actually did the full translation. It automatically detected that that was in Spanish and then translated it to English because their NLP only works in English. Now, next, we're doing text analytics and prediction here. So in this case, we're finding a couple key things like whale sharks and the world's biggest fish and that sort of thing that tell us, oh, this is about whale sharks. We want to pull in this data because we have a classifier that can do whale sharks. So great, that's the next step. And these are all using Microsoft Cognitive Services under the cover. The language detection, the OCR that you're going to see, the text analytics is all being done with Microsoft's Cognitive Services. And you can see a demo of that at the Microsoft booth out in the hallway too. And then here, we're extracting the video keyframes. In this case, the keyframes are being done every 2 seconds. In real life, it's actually 1 second. Then we do object detection, so you can see it's drawing a little bounding box in all of the frames it finds. So it finds where is the whale shark in this image. Then it's extracting text from the video. So in the very beginning, you can see there was this text, this swimming with the whale sharks, whatever that says, right there. And then the other thing it tries to do is find when and where this animal was located, right? Because we want to be able to plot that. And so here we're actually using some NLP, some natural language processing, and she says that she saw this last month, and she published it in September 2017. So from that, we can extrapolate this was spotted in August 2017. But we don't know where it was. And so another thing that this intelligent agent actually does is it'll automatically post on YouTube, great video, where did you see this, to try to get that information. And I was like, when I first heard that, I was like, oh my God, you guys, because YouTube commenters are like the worst of humanity, right? I'm like, how is this actually gonna work? But it turns out their response rate is almost 50%, which is impressive, which was more than I thought it would be. So anyway, they get this data, hold on to that, we'll come right back to it. And now we're doing a couple other things. We're processing the image. We run it against the database of all known whale sharks. It just grabs these landmarks. So it's doing essentially landmarking right here. It's finding the distinctive spots, running it against the database of all known ones, and then finding, okay, here are the ones that are most likely. You can see that this animal H017 is popping up the most with pretty high confidence on multiple of the images, also moderate confidence. So I think we can say that, yes, that is a good match. And so we can match that guy, and then next, we will post a reply, and then here's the last thing, here's where they saw it. And so it automatically says, great, good job, we found this, we are using this for science, wonderful. So, and then you can see here all the information. So this is their live site, you can see here they actually nicknamed it John Cena, you can nickname the things. And then there is the other whale sharks it's been seen with and all this other great stuff. So, that is the 5 things I wanted to show you. I have a number of resources you can grab here, which are I can make available, but some of the papers and research behind a lot of this if anyone is interested. And then one last plug, I know there is amazing work in AI and agriculture and water and such happening in St. Louis. Tell your friends, tell everyone, because the very worst is when a pot of money goes unspent. I want to work with you guys on the next generation of projects, so together we can all make a difference. Thank you.